Yeah, there. I was here early this morning, some of our leaders, that it was like 8:45 or 9, and they were leaving, and I said, "Come back, we're going to go have breakfast. We're going to go grab something to eat as a family." So it was fun to just get to be here and shout out to the Bodine, whole family involved, and Nashos, yeah, whole family. So how fun is it to just get your whole family? Because it's that camaraderie even with your families that we serve together. So, all right. Hey, we're going to get into the message this morning, and I love Carrie's story about being ridiculous. This message is titled Ridiculous. If you are taking notes, you can write that down. If you're using our church app or YouVersion, you can find that. Abundant Life Forwarding is our church app name if you don't have that yet. And you can take notes in there as well. But we're going to talk this morning about being ridiculous. Because maybe, has anyone ever done anything ridiculous? Yeah. Well, okay, how about, let me ask that different. How about for Jesus? How about that, right? Some of you are thinking like, I did something ridiculous and everyone around me thought I was crazy, but that's not, we're not talking that generic this morning because I'm sure you've got some stories. I know for me, and many of you have to bear with me if you've been at this church for a while because you've probably heard some of this story, but there's people that haven't, and I'll make it quick, but most of you know that I was in management with Safeway. I've actually opened this store here in town, and I was kind of in this place where I was an assistant manager, and it's kind of on the cusp of being a manager and being given my own store and all that kind of stuff. And that was kind of like, in that world, that was like we finally arrived kind of a thing. And so I was kind of right there, and it was kind of just the next step. And the bosses above me were talking about timelines, and it was working. And we got to this point where the Lord had really been speaking to me, and I did something absolutely ridiculous in a season in which I was on the rise. I asked if I could be demoted. And I said, I want to be demoted so I can pursue ministry. And I will tell you what, I got every reaction that there was. Like, there was a few people that were like, way to go, good for you, way to stick it to the man. And I'm like, that's not really wasn't my goal. But, I wish I could get out of here too. And I'm like, there are no jobs in this world as possible. I'm not that courageous. But I got confusion, I got frustration, I got ridicule. People speculated. I got asked a lot of questions. It didn't make sense to anyone I worked with, especially upper management. In fact, they were pretty mad at me. Just all this. I was told, you're going to regret this decision. Anything that could come of this, it just didn't make any sense. And I will agree, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense whatsoever when you're looking at the economy of our culture and the economy of this world. It didn't make any sense. And I just remember all of the responses of me looking ridiculous to everybody around me. Why would you do this? In fact, I remember the conversation with HR because they were like, we don't really know what to do with you because we've actually never had someone voluntarily get demoted from management. Like, we fired people, but we've never asked someone to, and so they had to figure it out. We don't know what to pay you, we don't know how to work this out. And so it was just a process, and everybody just thought I was nuts, and I probably was. This morning, though, we're going to talk about someone who was very ridiculous in the Bible, maybe more so. I know my story is not as ridiculous as Brian and Carrie's. I mean, there's the stories, right? They were selling everything, and I remember I think it was Brian, maybe some at work. It's like, does anyone want to buy anything? And that night, a bunch of trucks come rolling into their house, and the people just start, I want this, and I want this, and they just emptied out their house. That had been dirty dishes too. That probably looked ridiculous. In fact, that was absolutely crazy. But God did a work in the midst of that because they knew that was something they were doing for God. And that's what I want to talk to you about this morning. It's about a woman in the Bible who did something ridiculous, something that no one else dared to do. And this thing, this action that she had was an important piece on the way to the cross for Jesus. And that's what we're talking about in this sermon series. The sermon series is called The Way, and we're looking at the journey to the cross. And we're studying the book of Mark. In fact, we're studying the book of Mark most of this year. And we're looking now at this time in which Jesus laid down, and the way in which Jesus laid his life down for us. Last week, Pastor Eric gave a message called The Way of Love. He talked to us about
the importance of love in our life and expressing that as a Christian. And I love that Jesus stopped on his way to the cross and taught his disciples the importance of love, the importance of loving God, the importance of loving others, because the cross is really all about love, isn't it? John 3:16, you heard that one before? For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. It is an act of love. And so Jesus stops and he talks about love. And this week we're going to pick up in Mark chapter 14. So turn with me in your Bibles to Mark 14, and we're going to get right into this today. And as you're turning there, let me give you a little backstory, because we haven't covered the beginning part of Mark yet. We are going to come back and we're going to cover the whole first part of Mark as well later this year. But what's led up to this point is that Jesus has been now lately dropping some hints to his disciples that he is going to go to the cross and that he's going to die sacrificially. In fact, Jesus has told them this many times. And the disciples, they couldn't get their heads around it, because there was this disconnect with them. Like, you're supposed to be the Messiah, how could you die? If you're going to save us, how are you going to give your life? In fact, in Luke 18:34, Jesus is explaining to his disciples, I'm going to go to the cross, I'm going to die, and that I'm going to lay down my life. And it says, Luke 18:34, but they didn't understand any of this. They couldn't figure out what it was that Jesus was talking about. It just didn't make sense, because their mind, their perspective was so set on one thing. This is what he's supposed to do. Their expectations of Jesus. Anyone got any expectations of Jesus today? Well, Jesus, this is the way you're supposed to do it. This is the way I expect it to happen. And so because of that, they just couldn't get their heads around the fact that Jesus was actually going to lay down his life. And so we pick up in Mark 14. Let's start with verse 3. And it says here, and while he was at Bethany, the town of Bethany, in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at the table, and I just want to just stop and just look at this weird thing. He's at a dinner at a leper's house. That's like you saying, hey, we've all got the flu. You want to come join us for dinner? Like, what a weird thing to say. I'm hoping that what this means is that Simon the leper was someone that he had healed already from leprosy, and that they are now joining him. You know, we don't really know. We don't know much about this guy. But it just kind of struck me funny as I was reading this, that like Jesus would hang out with anyone. So here he is in this place. And it says that a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they scolded her. But Jesus said, leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. For you will always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. And truly I say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her, which I think is hilarious, because the disciples have just previously been arguing about, Jesus, I want to be the greatest, I want to be the greatest, I want to be the greatest. And he shut them down, and he said, she will be the one who is known. And then our text goes right into a very different type of story. It says, then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, who was there in the room when she poured the oil, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. So here we have these things, these two contrasting ideas. And just for your note, if you want to go study more on this later, the parallel accounts, this is also in Matthew 26, 6 through 13, and it's also in John 12, 1 through 8. As we go through the book of Mark, we'll find that some of these accounts are also in the other Gospels as well. And so we have this account of this thing happening. And there's some more information we find out about this account and from these other texts, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But really what I want us to see here this morning is that there was dueling perspectives. Dueling perspectives. Do you ever find yourself in a situation in your life where there's you and someone else and you have a different perspective on the same situation? That ever happened to you? All right, it's called marriage. And that's like how it works. Because God is hilarious enough to say, you should marry this person who's the opposite of you. and then get along for the rest of your life. And it grows you together, and it's a beautiful thing. But you have perspectives. You have a perspective. You're having a conversation with your adult child or your teenager, and you have a very different perspective on a situation, right? And they say, you just can't see it from my perspective. And you say, well, you can't see it from my perspective, and you end up in this clash of perspectives. And what we see here in this account, in this narrative, is that there are two perspectives that are happening here. And I want to contrast them this morning, because we'll find that there is a good perspective that was pleasing to Jesus, but there was another perspective that wasn't so much. These opposing perspectives. And we're going to look at three perspectives this morning. And the first perspective I want to look at is the perspective of waste versus the perspective of worship. So in here we have this story of a woman who's pouring the oil on Jesus, and we have a perspective of waste and we have a perspective of worship. You see, she had an alabaster flask, it said. Now this alabaster, when you had an oil or an ointment in this time, you could keep that in different containers. Alabaster, that type of flask, was the kind that the most expensive, precious ointments and oils would have been kept in. All right? And it says in one of the other texts, I think it was like a pound of it. Like there was a lot of it. And so it says here that it was worth more than 300 denarii. Does that mean anything to you? Yeah, it means. Here's what 300 denarii were. So a day's wage was about a denarii. So you have about a year's worth of salary. All right? So think of taking a year's worth of your salary, right, and just going, right? That's what this is. In fact, she doesn't say it's worth 300 denarii. In fact, John's account, this study tells us that Judas was the one. He did the math for us. So you can thank Judas for doing the math. I don't think he did it as a favor. I think there was something more going on there. But we have this really, really expensive. And I just want you to understand the cost and the price that was part of this flask. Okay? This was likely a family heirloom, something very precious that had been handed down maybe from generation to generation. But this is a big deal. And what do the disciples say? What a waste. What are you doing? What a waste. And these disciples, it says they were indignant, they were irritated. And it wasn't just because of the smell. Have you ever walked into a bathroom after someone has applied cologne or perfume? And you see that, woo! Someone's, you walk in and your teenager's getting ready, like, who's the girl? Like, that's the, right? That's like the thought. Like, I can't even imagine what that house smelled like. What did it smell like? They were upset, they were upset though because she was being wasteful. How could you be so wasteful? In their irritation, they missed something. They missed something big. You see, they fixed their minds on earthly things. Their perspective and their thinking was on earthly things, and she was fixing her thinking on the spiritual act of worship. To her, she was worshiping Jesus with what she had. She was worshiping. Maybe she had picked up on the hint a little better that Jesus was saying, I'm not going to be here long. And so she wanted to worship Jesus. And he defends her. See, her perspective wasn't waste. Her perspective was worship. And Jesus says, she has done a beautiful thing. She has done a beautiful thing. The disciples couldn't see it. The disciples couldn't see it. They said, Jesus, no offense, but you smell like nard. You smell really, really nardy. Right? Or gnarly or something like that. You don't smell like normal, Jesus. But Jesus, I'm just having a hard time understanding this perspective. I'm having a hard time seeing the beauty. They're so caught up in this waste that she has, and Jesus says, she's done a beautiful thing. Now, just put yourself in this room, and don't try to get too spiritual about yourself. And you're thinking about this, and you're thinking like, what is this woman doing? It doesn't make any sense. And what looked ridiculous to some was actually an offering to Jesus. What looked wasteful was actually worship. And some people see the things of God as a waste. When we are talking sometimes about the things of God, and I hope in your life you're talking about the things of God, there will be people that will see that as a waste of time, a waste of resources, a waste of attention. And they don't get it. They don't get, why do you praise God? I don't understand why you give God glory. Your life's not that great. And they don't understand it. But here's what I know about you and what I know about me. We're called to worship God, and we cannot let anyone shut that down. We cannot let circumstances, we cannot let people, we cannot let the voices of the naysayers shut down our worship. And we, like this woman, need to be intentional and say, Jesus, I'm going to worship you. You ever worshiped through really hard situations? Anyone ever done that before? I'm telling you what, if you haven't, if you've been in a hard situation, start worshiping Jesus, and you will see a perspective change. And something that might have looked ridiculous to you no longer does. And you refocus your mind on what God is doing. And your heart gets reset on God's purposes. Church, worshiping Jesus is never, ever a waste. And you might worship Jesus in different ways. You can worship Jesus through singing and worship, and that we call worship on a Sunday morning. You can worship Jesus through giving, we call it. You can worship Jesus by just going on a walk and just speaking about the greatness of His creation. You can worship Jesus in lots of ways with your life. You can worship Jesus by serving someone. I love that Jeannie, and I know Perry and Jen, they every week they go and they work at a food bank, and they're worshiping Jesus as they're serving those who are in need. That's worship. And so we must fix our eyes on worship and never consider it a waste. That's the first perspective, those opposing perspectives. There's this idea of waste versus worship. And the second thing, I'll get in a little deeper, is irrational versus insightful. See, it's not just that it's wasteful, it's also irrational. And I'll tell you what, some of the most irrational things I have done, according to the world standard, have been the most insightful in my life and the most impactful on my life. You see, when they're talking about to this woman about waste, it's not just that she's wasting something, it's that she's being irrational about it. She's being impractical about it. You see, when a guest would walk into someone's home, it would be normal for them to take a dab of oil and to place it on them, a scent, an anointing, a welcome, a blessing to them. But she didn't just take a dab, she pours out the entire contents of really, really, really expensive oil. And you have these men gathered around saying, "What are you doing, lady? Why would you do this?" And they say, "Don't you know that we could have fed the poor with the proceeds from selling that?" Not only was it irrational, it was irresponsible. Like, you just poured out our entire ministry budget for the entire year. Like, don't you know what you could have done? You could have given it to us. You could have just given it to Judas. He would have taken really good care of it. If they didn't know at that time. That wasn't going to be the case. But it just looked so irrational. So completely irrational to them. Now, Jesus responds with something that seems also irrational. He says, "Well, you'll always have the poor with you, but you won't always have the poor with me." Isn't that just mean of Jesus? Isn't that cold-hearted of Jesus? No, it's not, because Jesus knew their heart. Check this out in John 12:6. It says, "He, Judas, said this." Basically, when he says, "Why did you do that? We could have helped the poor." This tells us why Judas said that. Not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. And having charged in the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. Jesus exposes this thinking right in this moment. We can help the poor. And Jesus says, "Nah, you'll always have the poor." Not because he didn't care about the poor, because he knew their real hard intentions. But then in this account, we say the other disciples joined in. So this is just so irrational. But Jesus says there's a different perspective. He looks to this woman and he points something out that they had completely missed. In all of their hang-up on this irrational and irresponsible thing she had just done, he says she has greater insight. She has a greater insight. This woman had greater insight than every other disciple that had been following Jesus around for 3 years. It went over their heads. They're stuck in this place of, "Jesus, if you're the Messiah, how could you die?" And as they scolded her for her irrational act, they missed the moment. While they were being practical, they missed something spiritually critical that took place. Church, don't miss the moments. Don't miss the moments because you're thinking in the wrong manner. You miss the moments of what God is doing. Don't miss what Jesus is doing by being so focused on things that don't last. We get so focused on things that don't last in our life that we can miss this moment. And it says that she was anointed. He says, she's anointing me for my death. You see, Jesus knew that he was going to go to the cross, and there wasn't going to be time to prepare his body before it went to the tomb. He went to the cross, he was crucified, and then generally after someone died, you would put ointments on them and you would prepare their body, and then you would place them in the tomb. But there wasn't going to be that opportunity, and Jesus knew that she had the foresight. I don't even think she practically knew, but there's something in the spirit. And there are times in your life where there's something in your spirit where it doesn't even make sense in your head, where it seems like God's leading you to do something. And there was such a great insight that she had. This woman had the opportunity. Think about the impact of that. She anointed Jesus for his death. The anointing oil of God and the Holy Spirit on Jesus as he went to the cross. And I believe it was so soon. It was so close to his crucifixion. I just imagine that the smell of this aroma was still on him when he went to the cross. I just imagine being able to do something that big for Jesus. Imagine being asked, will you be the one to anoint me right before I go and rescue all of humanity for all time? It's a huge thing. And it was so insightful, I think, from her spirit. But we can miss what Jesus is doing when we're so focused on things that don't last. We get focused on things. We get focused on situations like this, and we start to analyze. What's wrong here? Something's not making sense with this situation. This could have been a better resource. I love with our church council sometimes that they're so practical and they're so good about being good stewards of kingdom resources. But then every once in a while, I watch the Spirit of God rise up in them and watch them be completely impractical for the sake of the kingdom of God. And to have these moments of clarity and insight in our lives when God is moving. It's like going to the eye doctor. Does anyone have to go to the eye doctor? All right, I have to go to the eye doctor, and I've been going to the eye doctor since I was like 10 years old. And I wear contact lenses, and without them, you would all be a blur. From right here, I couldn't make out one face in this room. I have really, really, really bad vision. And so, when I go to the eye doctor, the first thing they always want to start with is this, take out the contacts, look, read me the letters that you can see. And I know the E's on the top, and so I can always get that one. Like, I can't really see it, but I know there's an E on the top. Anything else? No, can't see anything at all. Does anyone have this experience at the eye doctor, or it's just all a big blur to you, right? And what does the doctor start to do? They start to move these dials. Do you like A, or this one, or this one, this one, this one? And all of a sudden, they start to make some adjustments. And things start to come into focus. And next thing you know, you can begin to see more clearly. And when I think about that doctor bringing things into focus for me, I think about God. I think about Jesus, the great physician who brings focus into our lives. And when we fix our eyes on him, when we look to him and we go to him and say, Jesus, right now these circumstances and these things and these people around me, it's kind of blurry, but I need you to begin to make those adjustments to my vision so that I can begin to have clarity and insight. And Jesus begins to bring things into focus. And in this situation with this woman, she's wasteful and she's irrational. And Jesus says, you missed it. She's actually insightful. And when we're focused on Jesus, the irrational becomes insightful. The most irrational things that people around you think become insightful things in your life. Have you experienced this before? If you haven't, I hope that sometime over this next few weeks ahead that you do something irrational for Jesus. It will bring you so much clarity in your life. There are irrational things. I've talked to some people, I remember a few months ago talking to someone, yeah, my finances were a mess. I couldn't afford anything. I thought I was going to lose the house. And in the midst of not having enough, I decided to start tithing. And now I have an abundance. That's irrational. Completely irrational. And yet, when we align ourselves with God's way, we gain new insight. And we begin to see things more clearly. And God begins to do abundantly more than we can ask or imagine. This is what happens when we focus on Jesus. The irrational becomes insightful. The things that make sense to nobody else become the biggest aha moments in your life. You know, the things of God look irrational sometimes. We're talking about Jesus, the way to the cross, the journey to the cross. Here's what 1 Corinthians 1:8 says about the cross. It says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." The very act that Jesus came for, to lay down his life for you and for me and for humanity, it says it's foolishness with one perspective. But in a different perspective, it's the power of God. And if you are in this room and you know Jesus and you've received him into your life, you know that to be true. You know that the things of God, that the cross of Jesus Christ and his resurrection is power. That it changes things. That it transforms your life. That we look at places in our life and we say, I don't have the capacity, I don't have the intelligence, I don't have the resources. But it says that to those of us who are being saved, it is the power of God. And when you begin to walk in the grace of God, and you begin to apply the mercy of God, and you begin to apply the things of God into your life, it becomes the power of God. And things that looked impossible now are possible. Things that looked illogical now make sense. And the irrational for this woman became insightful. And I don't know about you, but I will take a foolish-looking, grace-giving, life-transforming, power-producing, freedom-bringing gospel of Jesus Christ any day. I'll take the foolishness because it has absolutely transformed my life. Absolutely brings joy in places there shouldn't be joy. Absolutely brings peace in places where there shouldn't be peace. Absolutely calms storms in places that it doesn't make sense. I will take the foolish message of the cross. It will become power to me. Irrational versus insightful. And then we step back now. We've been looking at this woman and this woman, but now we got to step back and look at these things. The way that Mark lays these out, he puts these two things right next to each other. This woman who's pouring out everything, pouring out the most valuable things. This is probably the most valuable thing she owned, pouring it out. And immediately we next read, and Judas found a way to get a little bit of money by turning Jesus over to death. Two completely different mindsets. And so now we have selfish versus sacrificial. Selfish versus sacrificial. And there's this great contrast of perspectives between this woman and Judas. We see her sacrificial act of worship, and then we see his selfish act that served his interests. And what I see here is a notable difference in the depth of their relationship with Jesus. You see, Judas had been with Jesus for 3 years. He had been his disciple. He had gone out with the other disciples and ministered to people. He had seen the miracles. He participated in ministry. But his heart was set in this moment on doing something that served him. On the other hand, this woman, she chose to do something that served Jesus. Two completely different perspectives. You know, you can hang around Jesus. And there are some people who have hung around Jesus their whole lives, but never actually cultivate a deeper relationship with him. I mean, you might know some people that they say, yeah, I'm a Jesus person, I'm a Christian, but there's nothing in their life that shows that. Nothing at all. There doesn't seem to be any depth. But you can hang around Jesus. You can come to church, you can hang around Christian people, but never cultivate a deeper relationship with God. And we end up staying then in this place of this perspective of wasteful, irrational, selfish. We're not called to just hang around and stand back and watch Jesus. We're not called to go on to Instagram and hit the heart and just like Jesus. We're called to hit the follow button. Like there's a difference between like and follow. There's a difference, and we're called to follow Jesus and to build a relationship with Him. See, now most of us start, and this is okay, we start our relationship from a position of what can Jesus do for me? Did anybody come to Jesus broken and in need of saving? Anyone? Right. So don't you ask yourself naturally the question, someone's sharing the gospel with you, and in your mind you're thinking, well, what can Jesus do for me? Well, He can forgive all your sins, He can save you, He can set you free from addiction, all these things, you've seen it. And we come to Jesus, and we ask ourselves this question, what can Jesus do for me? That is a natural question to ask. You ever had someone try to sell you something, like, what's in it for me? What do I get out of it? This is how we are as humans. This is how we think. What can I get out of it? You get into a relationship with someone and you think, well, what am I going to get out of this relationship? That's just natural and normal. And when we come to Jesus, that's how our relationship starts. What can Jesus do for me? We reflect on our lives and we consider, what can I gain from Jesus? And I'll tell you what, we've got a lot to gain from Jesus, don't we? We've got a lot to gain. In fact, that is the message of the cross, that Jesus takes our trash and gives us treasure. I mean, that is like a really bad exchange rate for Jesus, really good exchange rate for us. Isn't it? Isn't it? I mean, trash for treasure? I mean, that's like going to a garage sale and seeing like a piece of junk sitting there. Like you got an old couch with flowers and rips, and it says free, and you say, I'll pay you $500 instead. What are you, stupid? I don't know. Like, the person selling it, I'm just hoping someone will take it to the dump for me. Like, that's all I'm hoping. And that's the exchange that we get with Jesus. Like, we're there, like, we come to Jesus as a torn up, flowery couch. And He says, I'll pay a lot for that. Makes no sense. We bring trash and He gives treasure. That is the start of our relationship. But at some point in our walk with the Lord, we need to mature to a different question in a different place. And that question is this: what can I do for Jesus? If we just stand back and look at Jesus, we'll always have a shallow relationship that says, what can Jesus do for me? What can Jesus do for me? What can Jesus do for me? Jesus, I wish you were just a vending machine. I could just put the dollar in and get out what I want. And that is not how a relationship with Jesus works. But we can get stuck in that place if we never try to mature in our relationship. But a maturing relationship moves from a place of considering what can I gain to considering what can I give. Now this applies to more than just a relationship with Jesus. A friendship, a marriage, a work relationship, a maturing relationship. Don't miss this. Some of you right now thinking like, my marriage is a mess and I don't know what's going on. I want you to see this. A maturing relationship moves from a place of considering what can we gain to what can we give. You want to have a mature relationship? It's a different question. You want to have a mature relationship with Jesus? It's the same thing. We've got to move from a place of, Jesus, what can you give me? What can I get from you? Oh man, more power. And, oh man, more blessing and all these things, right? Like, but what can I give to you, Jesus? And this woman in this story asked herself a different question than everyone else around her. She asked herself the question, what can I give to Jesus? Everywhere Jesus went, what did people want? Give me something, give me something. And for Jesus, the resource was like, heal me from this, set me free from this, minister to me, teach me, give me, give me, give me. And this woman says, let me give something to you, Jesus. The most expensive thing that I have, let me pour it out to you. And I want to ask you this morning a simple question. What does your relationship with Jesus look like? Which one of those is it? And I want to give you permission to start looking ridiculous today. To put aside opinions of our culture and those voices who will call you wasteful and irrational, and discovering what a life pouring out to Jesus could look like. Ask yourself, what can I pour out to Jesus? Well, really, I want you to begin to really think about this question. I want us to think about this. If you're following along on the digital notes, There's a community group discussion, but I want you to, whether you're in a community group or not, which you shouldn't because they're awesome, ask yourself some of these questions. I want to look at the third question right here. It says this: in assessing your relationship with Jesus, how could you move from gain to give? I want us to think about this week as a church. How can I move from gain to give? How can I mature in my relationship with Jesus, where it's no longer just all about me, but that I can worship him with my life and say, what can I give, Jesus? What can I give to you? Will you stand with me this morning? I want to pray over you. I want you to understand my heart on this, just in case you're missing it. I do not want to guilt you. I don't want to shame you. I don't want to mock you. But what I want for you is a maturing relationship with Jesus Christ, and it's the best thing you could ever have. And I believe in a maturing relationship, that question needs to shift. And so it's a simple, practical application, really. But as you think on this, don't just think about it, start asking God about it. Well, Jesus, what do I need to do? What can I? Some of us are afraid to ask the question because we're not sure what he'll say. Like, I don't want to ask that question because you made Brian and Carrie sell everything they had and moved. Right? But they knew what they were getting into. They had already made, here's the thing I'll tell you about Brian and Carrie. These are some good people right here. And here's what I'll tell you about them. They had already decided in their heart that they were going to be a people who give to Jesus. And so when they prayed and asked God what's next, and this is what he showed them, all right, we've already decided. So I'm asking us to make that decision and to begin to walk that out now. And watch what Jesus will do. Lord God, we come before you. We thank you, Jesus, that you went to the cross for us. We thank you that we have so much to gain. I ask this morning for each one of us that our perspective would begin to shift. That we wouldn't be in the camp of this is wasteful and irrational, but that we would say this is worship and this is insightful, Lord. That we wouldn't be in the camp of what can I gain, but we'd be in the camp of what can I give. Oh, and we discover that when we give, Lord, we gain more than we ever thought we could. So I pray for those this morning who are feeling afraid or stuck even in that, who are not sure that they want to step out and be a little ridiculous for you. Give us courage this morning to be ridiculous. Give us courage, Lord God, to be a people, to start asking a different question. You are good, Jesus. You deserve our praise. You deserve our worship. You deserve everything. So we pour out to you today. In the name of Jesus. Amen. If you want prayer this morning for anything said in this message, if you want prayer for anything not said in this message, we have our ministry teams up here. We'd love to pray with you. Some of you need to come up and maybe something's happening to you right now where you're like, I don't want to ask that question. It's just too hard. Will you pray with me? I think God would help me to let go. There's some things I'm holding on to really tight. I think God would help me to let go of this morning. But we're going to just close with a chorus together today. And as we do, would you begin even now, today? Don't wait till tomorrow. Begin reflecting on this question. What can you do in your walk with Jesus to begin moving from gain to give? What would that look like?